I am so excited to talk about running backs here this week. We have 5 games that are in 50-point over-unders, so let's get into it. Starting it off with S tier, I do have all the running backs you're starting each and every single week. Week 9 is no different. Half of them are in those 50-point over-unders, so don't need to go into a great detail here. I'm live every day if you'd like to, though. So feel free to turn on the notification button. Let's go on to A tier. We started off with Colt Williams versus the New Orleans Saints. Now, they are 14.5-point favorites. This game here is at home. And Blake Corum, is he the closer? I mean, he's been getting a lot of work in these types of games where they've been high favorites. So we might see a little bit of Blake Corum. That's the only fear we have with Colt Williams. Otherwise, the matchup is nice. James Cook versus Kansas City, 52.5-point over-under. Do I hate James Cook? People are asking because I have him in A tier after he just went nuclear. No, I don't hate James Cook. Last week, he had a great matchup. He took advantage of that. Now, this week, he does have a bad matchup. The Chiefs, they allow the 6th fewest fantasy points to running backs. You're still starting him, but just temper your expectations. Now, DeAndre Swift versus Cincinnati. This one here is a 51.5-point over-under. Joe Flacco is in fear of missing this game, which is pretty important for DeAndre Swift. The Bears are already favored. I'll go into more details about Joe Flacco when we talk about Chase Brown, but it's a down week last week for Swift. Now he's in a favorable matchup versus a 32nd ranked running back defense. And Kamani Vidal versus the Tennessee Titans. Now this is the 3rd easiest matchup for running backs. He's had great games against bad defenses. They're 8.5-point favorites on the road. Jared Patterson did come in to relieve Kamani Vidal. He's not going to get everything, so you have to see some Jared Patterson. It was a little concerning at first because we saw more than we thought, but then Kamani Vidal, of course, closed out the game. We were all happy for that. Chase Brown, let's talk about it. 51.5-point over-under versus the Bears. Bears, they're not a tough run defense. Now, Joe Flacco missing would mean a lot. Chase Brown got a big boost whenever Joe Flacco came into the lineup. Now, if Flacco were to miss, Brown drops all the way down probably to about C tier. You can check my rankings. The link is in my bio. I always update those as soon as news breaks. And then Ashton Jeanty versus the Jags. Now, it was a bad week for Jeanty before the bye. The 31-0 blowout loss versus the Chiefs. Vegas has this one as a much closer game. It's 45.5-point over with the Jags favored by 3.5 points on the road. Arrested Jeanty is a good Jeanty. Hopefully the coaching staff sees after the bye that Jeanty really needs to be getting 20-plus touches each and every single game like he had the 3 weeks prior to the blowout loss. Now, let's get into a B tier here. The other side of the ball versus Ashton Jeanty, we do have Travis Etienne versus the Raiders. 3 bad games in a row. Now, looking back, we look at this. He's faced the 12th, the 6th, and the 2nd strongest run defenses in the league. So it shouldn't be so surprising once we had a little bit more data to see what defenses were kind of shaking up midway through the season. The Raiders, they are 17th against running backs. The Jags are favored in this, so Etienne is a fine start as a running back too. Now, Tyrone Tracy versus the San Francisco 49ers. He was available in about half of leagues, so if you won the sweepstakes, you got him. You're going to be happy with this one. The 49ers are middle of the pack versus running backs. He can do just about everything that Cam Scadaboo can do except for run through players with his head like he's Juggernaut from X-Men. But nevertheless, no matter the game script, Tyrone Tracy can get it done on the ground and through the air. He's a capable pass catcher as well. Kareem Hunt, again, another guy who people were picking up off waivers and probably have to start this week. 52.5-point over-under versus Buffalo. Isaiah Pacheco is not practicing as of Wednesday, and I'm not expecting him to play in Week 9. It's not because he's not practicing, but it's because they have the Week 10 bye. So it would make a lot of sense for him just to set this one out because they are looking for the long haul. Now, Hunt, he will most likely be the lead back versus the Bills, who have given up the 6th most fantasy points to running backs and given up the 2nd most touchdowns to running backs on the ground. That's the Kareem Hunt specialty. Jaylen Warren versus the Colts, 50.5-point over-under. The volume should be there because he catches the balls as well. Colts are a pretty tough run defense. They're 7th best, so temper your expectations. Again, the volume will be there, and that's what's king in fantasy football. Now, we're talking about Rico Dowdle versus the Green Bay Packers. I'd like to share this quote with you. It's from Panthers head coach Dave Canales. It basically summarizes that Rico Dowdle is going to be getting more touches. This is what he said. He said, Chuba has meant a lot to the organization, certainly to identify that we wanted to build our team on and want to give Chuba the opportunity to go out and continue the impact in a positive way. Now, Rico has been highly efficient with his touches. We cannot ignore Rico, and Rico's been exceptional in a couple of games. and the opportunities he's had over the last 2 weeks has made some excellent plays. Love the tempo and violence that he runs with, and all these things that we talk about and we're working through this week. All that points to Dave Canales ditching the shared workload and riding the hot hand, which the hot hand has clearly been Rico Dowdle. Now, all that being said, it is by far the hardest matchup that Rico Dowdle will be facing. He plays the Packers, who are giving up the third most fantasy points to running backs. So do keep that in mind. And then J.K. Dobbins closing off B tier here. He gets to play the Houston Texans. This one here is the lowest over-under of the week, 39.5 points. You don't see a red border around Dobbins, indicating that it's a horrible matchup, but don't get it twisted. This is a bad matchup. The Texans defense is elite. I have concerns going into this one because both teams have great defenses. You're more than welcome to tier down to maybe C tier if you want a little bit more upside. I'm not sure it's here this week, but I also wouldn't be overly concerned about RJ Harvey's workload right now. I mean, he had 3 touches in the last game. That's not a fluke. That can happen, but it was on 8 touches. Now, if we saw the touches go more and more in his favor, then we need to raise our levels of concern and maybe adjust the panic meter. All right, now let's go on to C tier. It does start off with a guy a lot of people got off of waivers because it was the bye-apocalypse in week 8, so people had to drop him because he was on bye. Now, it is Bam Knight of the Arizona Cardinals playing against the Dallas Cowboys. It is the 53.5 point over-under, so I want just about everybody in this game. Now, Michael Carter was released and then added back to the practice squad as of Tuesday. They play Monday, so this is more of a situation of if Amari DiMercado does not suit up, Michael Carter will be the backup running back to Bam Knight. The only consistent player who we know will be getting touches is Bam Knight, so again, you have got to start him. The Cowboys, they give up the second most fantasy points to running backs, so it should be a decent outing for him, especially if they continue to use him in the passing game. Now, David Montgomery versus the Vikings, 48.5 point over-under, favored, which helps Monty's side because he can help grind out the game. The Vikings, they just got beat up by Kamani Vidal. David Montgomery so far in the season has really been touchdown or bust. You are hoping that he finds the end zone this week. And then Kenneth Walker versus the Commanders. Higher than Zach Charbonnet, but if you wanted to flip-flop those guys, that's perfectly fine. I'm typically going to side with the more explosive back if the touches are equal. Again, as a reminder, Charbonnet has got almost 70% of the carries inside the 10-yard line. So if you're hoping for some big plays from Kenneth Walker, they've got to come from outside of that. Now, Woody Marks versus the Denver Broncos. I just talked about this game. It's the lowest over-under of the week, 39.5 points. If Denver pulls ahead, that is good for Woody Marks. That means he's going to be their pass-catching back. He is by far the best pass catcher in that backfield. And the carry count since the bye week has been basically split between him and Nick Chubb. Now, Marks has been okay between the tackles, but his real calling card has been his receiving work. So hopefully we can see that here this week. And then Ramondre Stevenson versus Atlanta. The Falcons have been better against running backs, but not recently. Again, you play Christian McCaffrey, you play Devon Achane. That's going to sink your rankings as a defense. Ramondre Stevenson does get the volume, but he's kind of like David Montgomery. He's real touchdown or bust right now at the moment. Highly inefficient with his touches, and for what it's worth, he's not practicing as of Wednesday. So we'll talk about Travion Henderson here in just a little bit. Alvin Kamara versus the Rams. There's a change at quarterback. It is to Tyler Shuck instead of Spencer Rattler. So hopefully that gives Kamara some more targets. Now he faces the Rams defense, and they have allowed 0 rushing touchdowns to running backs despite facing off against Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, and Derrick Henry. All right, let's go into D tier. I am starting it with Aaron Jones. He faces off against Detroit. He started the game in week 8 in his first game back since week 2, which gives you a good indication of how the coaching staff is looking at him. They clearly want him out there. Bad matchup versus the Lions. They give up the 4th fewest fantasy points to running backs. So with a split backfield, probably avoid it until we get a better understanding of how it works. Zach Charbonnet, I talked about him with Kenneth Walker, so feel free to go up there, but averaging 2.5 yards per carry. Part of that is because he's called upon for short yardage work and the goal line carries. So his role is completely changed from previous seasons. Right now, he is touchdown or bust, and the Commanders, they're 16th against running backs, right in the middle of the pack. Corey Krosky-Merritt versus the Seattle Seahawks. Seahawks are favored in this game by 3 points. Now that's important because Bill is not their pass catching back. That is Jeremy McNichols. Bill's had 2 easy matchups 2 of these last 3 games, and he's failed to deliver on those. So he's almost a bench. He's had a ton of explosive plays earlier on in the season. We haven't seen those here as of yet. So if you just want to keep stashing him, that's perfectly fine. Just know that the game script goes negative. It is not in Bill's favor. And then Tajay Spears versus the Chargers. It's a close 50-50 split between Spears and Tony Pollard. Spears has been the more explosive player on the Titans, but the Titans are one of the, if not the worst offense in the league. They're averaging the fewest points per game with 13.8. All right, let's go ahead and wrap it up here. We're getting into E tier. I want to talk about 2 running backs, Brashad Smith versus the Buffalo Bills and Travion Henderson versus the Atlanta Falcons. Now, with Smith, he has one of the highest over-unders of the week, 52.5 points. The Bills here, I mean, if you're going to need a pass-catching back, look no further than Brashad Smith. Smith is flexible in a PPR league, or if you've got riddled with injuries or you have bye week issues, Brashad Smith can help you out in a pinch. And then Travion Henderson versus the Falcons. You guys know I do not care about Wednesday practices, but Ramondre Stevenson, as I mentioned, is not practicing on Wednesday. Henderson had 10 carries, which is his second highest of the season just last week, but he failed to have a target in either of these last 2 games, which is really his bread and butter. If Henderson is a go and he finally gets the backfield just to himself, that's kind of what we've all been waiting for. And then F tier, these are guys you cannot really start, have really no confidence in starting any of them. They're mainly all stashes unless a player ahead of them becomes a surprise inactive. Now, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell for notifications to know when I go live, because I go live each and every single day. Be on the lookout for other ranking videos that'll drop this week, and I'll see you in the next one.